Hey everyone, this is Michael Wolf, host of the Food Tech Show, and today's guest is Paul Shapiro, the CEO of Better Meat Company. And the reason I want to have Paul on the show today is the company recently announced a new microprotein fermentation plant that really is a big new direction for the company. Those of you familiar with Better Meat Company know that they've been one of the key players in building plant-based protein ingredients for hybrid meat products to help reduce the reliance on factory farming. And that's really been Paul's mission. And with this new plant, they really think, and he really thinks that they could take it to the next level. So it's an interesting conversation. We also captured Paul's thoughts on things like what's happening in cell-based meat and the overall scaling of the plant-based meat industry. So it's a fun conversation, an educational one. So I hope you enjoy it. As always, you can get more Food Tech Show podcasts at thespoon.tech or in your favorite podcast app. All right, that's it for now. Let's get to our conversation with Paul Shapiro. Well, all right, I am excited to be here with Paul Shapiro, author, CEO of Better Meat Company. And Paul, I'd call you an evangelist too. I think you're like a alt protein evangelist. Is that accurate?
Thanks, Mike. Well, first of all, I'm glad to be on with you. Second, I think that's true. I am an evangelist for alt protein because I think it's one of the most important things that we can do to save humanity from itself. So I'm glad to be representing my own company, the Better Meat Co., but I really am an evangelist for the whole space, and I'm rooting for the success of other companies, including those who might be competitive with us too. I hope they succeed as well.
I think we talked last year when you raised, I think it was an $8 million or so funding round at the time. I really learned a lot about Better Meat Company as we talked, how you were a B2B ingredient-based company looking a lot at hybrid, all proteins and meats. And little did we know at the time, you had a little stealth project going on where you're basically working on a large fermentation facility to produce risoprotein. Is that what it's called?
It is. Yeah. So first of all, thanks. And let me say, I read The Spoon and I listen to your podcast. So it was an honor to be on with you, Mike. And that's right. So really, since the inception of our company, we have been working on a fermentation platform, and we wanted to make sure that it would work. It wasn't so much about keeping it secret as much as we didn't want to go out touting something that was really just like a bench scale experiment. We wanted to make sure that it would work and that we could scale it. And so while we have a core part of our business at the Better Meat Co., which is selling what we call our classic line of products, these are meat enhancers that are made of conventional plant proteins, fibers, fats, and flavors. We sell those to companies like Purdue Farms and other companies in the crab and in the burger space and so on for them to blend into their meats so that they can reduce their own footprint on the planet and on animals. But in addition, we also have our new generation of products, which is called Rhiza, as you mentioned. It's R-H-I-Z-A. It's just Latin for root. And we basically have been working on this fermentation platform that allows us to transform whole plant ingredients like potatoes into really delicious, succulent mycoproteins within mere hours. And so we're excited to announce this plant that you mentioned and to partner with food companies that want a new generation of alt protein.
One of the things that has struck me about your company and what I thought was intriguing last year is you were very much taking this, I guess, B2B platform approach that I think is surprisingly rare in the space, right? It seems like a lot of the money is going into companies that are essentially building consumer-facing brands, which, as you know, can be expensive. If you're going to go toe-to-toe with Nestle, if you're going to go toe-to-toe with these other big companies like Tyson, it takes a lot of money. And so you wisely, I would say, have chosen to kind of go down that B2B path to be more of an arms dealer to those other companies who are basically creating products.
Oh, it's very kind of you, Mike, and I would agree. So, it's hard to pick winners in like the CPG category. A lot of companies seem promising and then they end up failing, sadly for them. But we've taken more of like a picks and shovels approach, meaning, if you think about the 1848 gold rush, not that many people got rich on gold, but a lot of people got rich on selling, shovels and pickaxes to the gold miners. And I feel very confident that alternative protein is here to stay. It will not be alternative for long, but we have a better chance, I believe, of succeeding as a B2B ingredients company by partnering with other companies than we do by trying to build our own brand, which, as you correctly point out, Mike, it's tough to do. In addition, though, I think there's another benefit of it, which is that we can have a bigger impact faster. So we, for example, if you just take Purdue Farms, as we mentioned, we partnered with them on the Purdue Chicken Plus. It's half plant, half chicken, nuggets, tenders, and patties. And those are now in 7,100 grocery stores. They have grown from 0% of Purdue's frozen chicken nugget sales in the non-organic category to 20% today. So, you think about 20% of a massive company like Purdue's nuggets, that's really a big thing that we could not have done on our own. And so we're very proud of partnerships with big food companies, not only because I think it's good for our business, but because we're helping these big food companies reduce their own footprint on the planet in a way that we would not get that type of a sustainability benefit if we were a small startup trying to compete in our own way. So, I'll give you an example. So think about like the Impossible Whopper, which is awesome. I've gotten it many times. I think it's truly historic that Burger King is selling the Impossible Burger. But, according to news articles, at most it's about 2% of the burger sales at Burger King. And imagine, though, if in addition to offering the Impossible Whopper, Burger King also, let's say, blended their conventional Whopper to be 50% plant protein. Not only would consumers not notice the difference, but at that point, you now have, instead of a 1 or 2% reduction in meat consumption, you have a 50% reduction in meat consumption without having to persuade millions of consumers to change their behavior. They just buy the conventional product. They buy the default product. So that's what we're trying to do by being a good partner to major food companies and helping them use fewer animals in their products. We can, I think, have an even bigger impact on the goal, which is a more sustainable food supply, than if we were just trying to sell our own products that were competing in the marketplace.
But why is this story of hybrid not getting as much attention? There's a lot of excitement this week as Impossible's announced their plant-based nuggets.
Yeah.
A few weeks before that, Beyond, and all this excitement around the kind of 100% plant-based. But this idea of creating hybrid products, which would have a significant impact, doesn't seem like it's getting as much attention.
I agree with you. It's not. And first of all, I'm one of the ones who's thrilled about Impossible and Beyond's new chicken nuggets. I can't wait to try them. I think it's fantastic. Chickens need more advocates and they need more companies working for them. So I am, very bullish, or maybe I'll say I'm very chickenish on them doing that. Now, at the same time, I agree. We got to attack the problem from a variety of angles. And so, in the same way that fossil fuels are such a big problem that you want lots of alternatives, right? You don't just want wind, you don't just want geothermal, you don't just want solar. You want a variety of alternatives. I think the problem of factory farming animals is also so big that you want lots of alternatives. Yes, you want plant-based. Yes, you want cultivated. You also, though, want hybridization, and hybridization is a big part of it. It's not mutually exclusive with these other strategies. It's supplemental to them, but I think it can be an even more efficient thing. Now, to your earlier point, Mike, it is true. Like, I don't like to use the F word. These aren't fillers at all. These are enhancers. Like, a filler is, like a carbohydrate-based thing, like a breadcrumb or a cellulose that really subtracts from the amount of protein and other nutrition in the product. What we at the Better Meat Co. offer, though, are really meat enhancers. They make the product actually better. So they either maintain or increase protein levels. They add nutrition. You're going to have less saturated fat, less cholesterol, fewer calories, more fiber, better yield, better moisture retention. Like, overall, it's just a better product. In fact, going back to the Purdue chicken nuggets, not only did the Food Network name them the best tasting frozen chicken nugget in America, but also Chris Purdue in an interview said that their own consumers in focus groups actually prefer the blended nuggets. So here we are talking like if you could subtract half the chicken from a nugget and have the Food Network say it's the best tasting frozen chicken nugget in America and your own consumers say they like it better. Imagine how many hundreds of millions, if not billions of fewer chickens we'd have to raise if every chicken nugget were blended like that. So that's the real goal. But I also am enthusiastic about plant-based meat and cultivated meat. I think these are all important strategies, but I agree with you. Hybridization just hasn't gotten the same type of attention. And I think the reason is because a lot of the people behind the movement are vegans themselves, and they like products that they will eat, and they want products that their friends in their social circle will eat, and they want, that full experience. And that's great. I think it's wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I wish more people would see the world that way, in fact. But I do think we got to keep in mind meat consumption is going up, not down. Even in the United States, where we live in this bubble where we see all these announcements about plant-based progress all the time, but per person meat consumption is going up, not down. In the US, in China, in India, in Brazil, in Mexico, and all the places it's going to matter the most in the future, per capita meat consumption is increasing, not decreasing. And plant-based meat is a tiny, tiny tiny rounding error in the total meat market. Even in the United States, where it's the most advanced, it's still way less than 1% of the total volume of meat that is produced. So, we need to do something. Even if you believe like Barclays and others of these more aggressive predictions about how fast plant-based meat is going to grow, like Barclays says that they think it'll be 10% of the total meat market by the year 2030. So about a decade from now, it'll be 10%. Well, that still means 90% of the meat is coming from factory farmed animals. So hybridization makes sense for a lot of reasons, but I think it's going to be not only an important, but actually an integral part of the future of alt protein.
That's so interesting on the predictions. I remember thinking when the iPhone came out that, and you saw how powerful the iPhone was, that a lot of the forecasts were touch screens, these smart devices like this will account for 10% of the phones in 10 years. It was crazy. And I thought to myself, this device is so powerful, like they're completely wrong. I wasn't doing the mobile phone forecast at the time because I would have been much more aggressive. So I just wonder if there's a possibility, assuming all things are equal, you could scale these type of ingredients. If, the Purdue chicken nuggets are that much better, if we really are that tasty and consumers aren't getting all scared and it's not getting politicized. I feel like there's a danger that could go that way with plant-based. Do you think it could be faster than that? It seems like that could be like a pretty conservative forecast to me.
Yeah, I do think it could be faster, but it's a huge, huge burden to do it. Like just the infrastructure alone is massive. So I don't pretend to know more than Barclays, but maybe they're wrong. I think Pat Brown is a pretty smart guy, the founder and CEO of Impossible Foods. And, he thinks it'll be faster than that. And I hope he's right. I'd be thrilled if he were right. But even so, let's say it's not 10%. Let's say it's 50%. Still, that means that 1 out of every 2 packages of meat is going to be coming from factory farmed animals. So, no matter what, even if they're off by a factor of 5, I still think hybridization is going to be really important. And I would love to live in a world where it wasn't important. But sadly, I think that humanity's addiction to raising animals for food is very strong.
The story of hybridization is powerful. We've seen it in the automobile industry. We see it in other spaces where it just, you need this kind of segue path towards the future, and you can't go fully into the future without kind of these kind of baby steps along the way. So I think it's a powerful story. I'm just, and it sounds like you're out there evangelizing it. And it sounds like the big food companies like Purdue are on board with this. Just hope that more companies and even the consumers get on board with it.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I agree with you. And second, it's tempting to use the hybrid car analogy, but I think it's actually even more appropriate to really compare it to increasing fuel efficiency standards for cars, because our goal is to make hybridization the norm, the default. We don't want it to be a separate product. The default products should be better by hybridizing them. And so in the same way that cars today get much better fuel efficiency than cars yesterday did, we could see something where you would just expect that animal-based meat is going to be combined with lower footprint ingredients to reduce its total footprint, in the same way that cars today are equipped with technologies that help them to reduce the amount of fuel they need to go per mile. So I think, as soon as this becomes the default, you end up really reducing a lot of the pressure on the system, and you can start drawing down the number of animals who are being raised and slaughtered for food.
And is part of the story getting big CPG on board of this, making the economic argument that it is more cost effective ultimately to have hybrid products? I mean, because, you can appeal to the value systems all day of executives, but a lot of times I think they're bottom line focused. So I think part of a big conversation and the big part of your job is convincing them that ultimately this makes more economic sense.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although I would say, some of our customers at the Better Meat Co. do use us for that reason. We are cheaper than beef today. And so you can put us into burgers and, they do like a stealth health approach. They don't advertise it, right? So, just in the same way that certain canned soup manufacturers started reducing sodium without touting it, right? They didn't want people to think it had less sodium because people hear less sodium and they think less flavor. So they just gradually reduced sodium over a period of years so that people wouldn't notice, and they just did a stealth health approach. You can also do a stealth health approach here and not necessarily market them as blended or hybrid products, but just have them be better. So if anybody looks at the ingredient deck or the nutrition panel, they'll of course see that it has been enhanced with plant protein, and it'll have better nutritionals, again, less saturated fat and so on. But you don't actually have to tout it. And so I think, though, that it will become to be thought of that blended is just better. In the same way that let's say you go to like a juice joint or a Jamba Juice or something, and, they ask, do you want to boost your smoothie with hemp seeds or matcha or whatever? When you get that, you don't think you're getting less smoothie, right? You're getting a better smoothie. You're not getting, I'm getting less smoothie. But in this case, it's not really, you don't focus on less meat. You focus on it being better meat. This is actually tastier. It is a better experience for you, and it's better for you and better for the planet too.
One of the things that struck me when I was talking to Christy Legali of Rebellious is she said that one of the markets they're doing well in is the school market, in part because I think that there is certain requirements by school and education boards around feeding kids. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on is that like a potential way which you could maybe wedge your way into the education market? Is that some part of the conversation you're having? Do you think that's an important conversation, is how we're feeding kids, and kind of the requirements around that?
Yeah. So actually, let me give you an example. I won't use their name since I'm not sure if they would want this publicized, but we actually are partnered with a school lunch provider that tested the conventional burgers, which are solely beef, to a blended burger, which is 33% better meat co and 2/3 beef, with a group of 6th graders. And they didn't tell them anything other than these are two different burgers and you say which one you like better. 88% of these 6th graders, and there were, I think, more than 50 of them in the focus group, chose the blended burger, saying it tasted better. And so when you get those kind of numbers, you start realizing that there's real potential here to actually improve on meat. Animals are only going to get really only marginally better, right? We're not going to breed them to be that much different than they are, just in the same way that horses today are kind of like the same they were 50 years ago. And similarly, cows and chickens are not going to be that much different. But when you start controlling the levers and start adding, what you can actually enhance the meat with and boost it with, you can make it much better. And that's what we are experts at doing at the Better Meat Co.
As I saw the announcements this week by Impossible and considering what Beyond announced, I began to get a little bit worried for the smaller guys, like Nowadays, with Max Elder, which I think Rebellious. Do you think the big guys elbowing their way into alternative nuggets, alternative chicken, do you think there's enough space for some of these small guys? Do you think it's going to be hard for those guys?
Oh, I think there's more than enough space. So first of all, I think it's kind of illustrative that people like you and I, Mike, think of Beyond and Impossible as the quote big guys, just because they're so tiny compared to the rest of the meat industry.
Right.
But yes, admittedly, in the plant-based space, they are the big guys. And there's others. I mean, Morningstar doesn't get talked about a lot, but they're huge in this space in terms of the retail share that they demand, or that they command rather. But yes, I think there's more than enough room. So, my view is the following. In the market, there's enough room for McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's. They're all just selling fast food burgers and fries, and they're all competing with each other. And there's lots of other fast food burger and fry joints as well, and there's room for them. So if at the bigger scale, all those companies can compete with each other, surely there's room in the plant-based space for lots of companies doing lots of things. So I think there's actually more room for more companies to get involved in that. This is like the nascent early days of this industry. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that the people who are first are going to be the winners. Sometimes that's not the case. So I agree with you. Like if I were Max or Christy from Rebellious or from Nowadays, I would be thinking about reaching out to meat consumers, not necessarily plant-based consumers, and getting them onto those products. And I think both of those companies are really promising, and I've had both of their nuggets and liked them both. So I think they have a bright future.
You mentioned all these different fast food spaces. I have seen like Seth Goldman working on Plant Burger, for example. What do you think of the plant-based quick service chains? Do you think there's potential for expanding these dedicated plant-based chains more, or do you think we just need to see McDonald's and Burger King embrace plant-based more?
Well, first of all, I love Seth. I'm a huge fan of what he has done, both with Honest Tea and with Beyond, and now with the Plant Burger. So my hat's off to him as a real OG of this socially conscious entrepreneurial space. Second, I'm thrilled to see these companies. I would love to go to a Plant Burger, but I think the ultimate impact is going to be by having the major players see the success of companies like Plant Burger or other types of plant-based QSRs, and then decide they want in on it too. So, I was in Germany right before the pandemic, and there was a McDonald's and a Burger King next to each other, and they both were advertising vegan burgers. And I thought, what a world! This is incredible to see the Rebel Whopper and the McVegan is what it was called, being advertised right next to each other. And so I, of course, went into both and bought both to compare them. But that's the world that I think we're going to need to get to in order to actually do something that will achieve the sustainability goals of this space. And so in the same way, for example, that McDonald's originally was like a big owner of Chipotle back in the day, they're not anymore, but they were. I could see McDonald's ending up acquiring, some of these other chains, or who knows what might happen. But I do hope that the success of these smaller new chains leads to the big players trying to emulate them.
Let's talk about your new plant. Tell us about it and what do you see the ultimate production capacity of it being?
Sure. So, in the fermentation game, there's really like 4 levels, right? So there's bench scale, where you're just basically doing things in the lab and making tiny little samples. Then you go to pilot scale, where you could actually produce some samples for people. Then you go to demonstration scale, where you really are scaling up to show that your technology works prior to going to the full scale, where then you build something that is really massive. So we're at that 3rd level now. And basically, let me just back up. If you think about plant-based meat today, nearly all of it is made from 3 things, either wheat, pea, or soy, right? Or some combination of those 3. And we are offering a 4th option as a B2B ingredients provider of mycoprotein. And so why would you want to do this? Like, what's the matter? Well, think about, just take pea protein as an example. To make pea protein, you need to grow a field of peas, harvest that field, mill it into a flour. Now you've got a pea flour that is probably about 20% protein. It's not enough. So now you got to fractionate it and isolate it. So you're removing the fiber, removing the fat, concentrating it down into a pea protein powder. It's like 70% protein now, but then it doesn't have the texture of meat. So then you have to put it through twin screw high moisture extrusion, which uses a lot of heat and a lot of pressure to change the molecular structure of that protein to make it meatier than it otherwise was. Now, the reason you have to do that is because plants and animals are very far apart on the evolutionary tree of life. Plants don't have the texture of animal meat because they're just really far away. However, there is a 3rd kingdom. There's not just plants and animals. There's also fungi. And fungi is an entirely different kingdom, and it's not in the middle of plants and animals. It's way closer to animals. In fact, fungi are so much closer to animals than to plants that, like us, they breathe in oxygen and they breathe out CO2. So, you think about like trees will breathe in CO2 and sequester it and then breathe out oxygen. Well, fungi are so much like animals that they breathe in oxygen, breathe out CO2. And so their flesh is much closer to the flesh of animals. And that's why mushrooms have been used for centuries as a meat substitute, because they're just so much naturally meatier than plants. So you don't have to do all of that processing that I just mentioned to get a fungi to have a meaty texture as you do with a plant, because you're starting at a much easier place to do it. So what we're doing at the Better Meat Co. is using fungi to run a special type of fermentation where we use very common whole ingredients like potatoes and subject them to a fungi fermentation that converts that feedstock into a delicious, succulent, meaty experience within only hours. So by the time we inoculate our fermenter to the time that we harvest the fermenter, we are able to get that down to way less than a single day. So think about how long it takes, let's say, for a cow. You don't slaughter cows for at least 1 year or maybe 2 years if they're grass-fed. Pigs, like 5 months. Chickens, about 40 days. Well, we can harvest our mycelium in a tiny little fraction of that. In fact, less than 1 day. And that's because we're operating at the microscopic level. So, you think about organisms, like the bigger the organism, the longer it takes to replicate. So, it takes an elephant a long time to make more elephants. It takes a pig a pretty long time to make more pigs. Then chickens less time, and mice, they're starting to get really rapid. But the smaller you get, the faster the replication time. And we're dealing at the microscopic level. And so that's how we can create a river of our rhizomycoprotein in only mere hours. So at our new plant, which is in Sacramento, we can produce thousands of pounds of this product per month. Now, that's not enough to, supply a McDonald's, but it is enough to supply companies that want to do pilot testing or smaller companies that want to release their own new products. And what we're trying to do is to create a better whole food product that you can use as the basis of a meat substitute that doesn't involve all of the processing, doesn't involve so much to have to do, and there's a very light footprint on the planet, and is just healthier. So not only is it a whole food, but it's higher in protein than eggs, higher in iron than beef, higher in potassium than bananas, and it's high in fiber, and it naturally contains vitamin B12, unlike plant foods. So this is like a real superfood that we can produce and give plant-based meat makers and animal-based meat makers an option that they can either use as the basis of their new products or blended products, whichever they want, but something that has a really meaty texture that is a whole food and that works really well as an alt protein.
All right. So it sounds like pretty magical technology to kind of make this happen that fast. Can you give us like the dumbed down kind of 101 version of how you're doing this conversion in mere hours?
Yeah. So first of all, I agree with you, Mike. It does sound like magic, but rest assured, it is not magic. It is science. And so basically what we're doing is in the same way that a cow eats grass and converts that grass into a steak, we are using our own quote unquote animal, which is a microscopic fungi that eats the starch in, for example, a potato and converts it into a protein. And so, for example, a potato has like less than 1% protein typically, but by the end of this fermentation, it has gone to something that's about 45% protein. So just think about that we were able to convert carbs into protein in that type of a rapid way. And so that's the basic gist of it. Like if you think of it like animal agriculture, except we're using microscopic quote unquote animals who obviously aren't animals at all, that's basically what's happening is they're eating one food and converting it into their bodies like a cow would convert grass into a steak. And then we harvest them and eat that.
I'm curious, you keep mentioning potatoes. Are you also using other starter kind of sources beyond potatoes? And does that result in a different variety of rhiza?
Yeah, great question, Mike. So the short answer is yes and yes. So we use a variety of things and we're still optimizing the formula to make sure we can wring as much cost out and to be as sustainable as possible. So the holy grail for all the companies in this space is to be able to utilize like agricultural byproducts. And so we've done a lot of that. We've tested a whole suite of agricultural byproducts to see what our microflora enjoys eating the most. And potatoes are a particularly effective one that we really like and because they really like it. But we have tried other things too, from rice to beer brewery waste and more. And yes, just in the same way that animals eating a different diet produces a different taste or a different nutritional profile for their flesh, what we feed into the fermenter does control some of the nutritional components about what ends up coming out at the end of the fermentation.
Okay, so this is generation 2, essentially, you're talking about, and you positioned it as. So it's stage 3 production. So you're getting up there into the thousands of pounds per month. Mm-hmm. So where does this go? Ultimately, how much are you producing? And then do you move beyond this to a higher scaled production plan at some point?
Yeah, so that's what we're planning right now. So the goal of this demonstration plant is to show that our technology can scale, that we can run it, and that there's demand for it. Now, we've already proven there's demand because ever since we announced the existence of this plant, we have been absolutely inundated, just deluged with food companies wanting samples, wanting to come tour, wanting to taste it, and so on. And it's a really impressive site. I mean, this is the largest mycoprotein whole biomass fermentation facility outside of corn in the UK, anywhere in the world, to my knowledge. So, there's other companies doing great things in here, but in terms of scale, this is quite big for where we are as a startup. And so, yeah, we can supply some, but we have to build a plant much bigger than this in order to really get to scale and start having the sustainability gains that we want. So the next step for us is to raise our Series A round, which we will be going out for in the fourth quarter of this year, 2021, and looking to raise money to actually build a plant dramatically bigger, exponentially bigger than this, so that we can create a much better alternative protein industry with greater options and greater versatility for the players in the space, whether they be the big players or the small players, for them to be able to utilize.
So would you compare yourself more to like a Nature's Fine than like what you see, like, for example, Motif? I see all of this platform players essentially providing ingredients for the big food companies and novel ingredients. Who is like a peer to you in this space?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I love what Nature's Fine is doing. I think it's really cool. I thought the cream cheese was wonderful. I tried it and really enjoyed it. And my colleagues here at the Better Meat Co. also were impressed by their cream cheese. So more power to them. But they're a CPG brand. They're not doing B2B ingredients as far as I'm aware. And they are using a very different kind of fermentation. So first of all, they're using an organism that no one's ever consumed before. They did get GRAS status from FDA, so a hat off to them for that. That's fantastic. But they're just doing a very different kind of fermentation that's basically in open air. What we're doing is a submerged liquid fermentation that basically involves taking a process that is very natural, happens in nature. We're wrapping stainless steel around it and allowing it to happen in a faster way that it would normally happen. So to answer your question directly, I think the company that is most analogous to us is based in Scotland. They're called 3F Bio, and they changed their name recently to be called Enough. And they just raised a $51 million round, so they're doing pretty well. But they've been around since 2015, I think is when they were founded, and I'm rooting for their success. I think their CEO, Jim, is a super nice guy, and I really like what they're doing. He was a former Corn exec who now has started this company, and they're doing some really cool stuff over in Europe. So they're looking to do like B2B mycoprotein ingredient sales as well. To my knowledge, I don't think they have a demonstration plant that's anywhere near the size of this plant. But what they're doing is pretty exciting. And they are also looking to build a full-scale production plant, according to news stories that I have read. So I can't wait for us both to be in the market. There's room for a lot of us. So the mycoprotein world is wide open, and we're going to need more than one company to make it succeed.
I want to ask you a few more things before we go, because I think, like I said, you're an astute observer of the space. I'm wondering if you guys are ever going to look at cell-based meat. I know it's a space you've written about and you look a lot at. I think it's interesting. We just published a story this morning on The Spoon. Pat Brown is out again, doubling down on his skepticism of cell-based meat, where I think he called it vaporware.
Yes.
Which I think I said to my colleague, he's either going to look like a genius in 10 years or look very short-sighted when it comes to cell-based meat. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a few things. So first, entertainingly, I did read your story on that this morning, and I had to Google what vaporware meant. So I don't know, maybe people in the software space are more familiar with that, but I didn't know what it meant. But for those who are too embarrassed to admit that you don't know, it's basically something that's always in design and conceptual and is never actually in real life. But anyway, first, I hope he's wrong. But I think the overall tenor of your piece reflected my opinion, which is that the costs are coming way down. There's hundreds of millions of dollars being invested in this. And I think it's important to examine this option because I do think that a lot of people are going to want what they perceive as the quote unquote so-called real thing. I think a lot of people will be happy to eat plant-based meat, but I think a lot of people also are going to want what they perceive as the so-called real thing. And cultivated meat can be a part of that solution for them. However, if he's right and it never does take off, all the more reason that we are going to need hybridization, because plant-based meat is going to take a long time to scale up, just like cultivated meat will. It's going to be a very long process for them. But the reason why the Better Meat Co. isn't doing that, we're not focused on cultivated meat, is because, frankly, I just think the problem is so urgent. The problem of climate change and all the ills associated with factory farming of animals are so urgent that I wanted something that we could make a dent in the market today by partnering with the big food companies and supplying them with large volumes of product today. That's why we're partnered with Purdue and other big food companies to help them reduce their own footprint on the planet. I'm here in California where wildfire season is now 12 months every single year. Thankfully, it's only about like 91 degrees here in Sacramento, but a week ago it was 111 here. We had a story that in the Sacramento River, 100% of the Chinook eggs appear to have died from the heat wave that we just had, and they're endangered. So, the world's falling apart. The boat is sinking. And I wanted to focus on something I thought that we could scale really rapidly, rather than something that I think will make a really big difference, but maybe 10 years from now. Plant-based meat has been on the market for decades, and it still is less than 1% of the market. I think cultivated meat, while it could play a really major role in the future, it's not going to get to 1% for a long time. So that's why I'm not doing it, but I'm cheering on those who are. And I'm glad that people are investing in those companies because, I think you need many different oars in the water. You want lots of alternatives to address this gargantuan problem that we're trying to tackle. You
mentioned earlier, there's a lot of people who are vegans in the space, and we all have our biases. And in a way, that's kind of shaped a lot of the way that kind of the industry has gone. And it sounds like we want to welcome everyone who eats meat, for example. The fact that you're focused on hybrid, you're recognizing that there are people out there who also eat meat, and they're going to continue to be a big part of the market. I thought that was a really interesting observation.
Yeah. I just hate to say it because I wish it weren't true, but people really want meat. One of the very first things that cultures do as soon as they get more money is they start eating more meat. In cultures like India and China, when the middle class starts expanding, they just start eating a lot more meat. And, you can't blame them. That's what we've done. As soon as Americans started getting more money decades ago, we started increasing meat consumption. And except for a blip after the Great Recession, we've basically had an uninterrupted ascent to continually eat more and more meat. Like, people seem to eat as much meat as they can. But the good news is that I think that what people want is the experience of meat. They don't necessarily want animals to be slaughtered for it. In the same way, when I, hit a light switch, what I want is light. I want the experience of light in the room. If that comes from fossil fuels or from renewable energy, it's really, of course, I'd prefer for it renewable, but most people don't really care. They just want light. Well, I think the same is true with meat. People want the experience of meat. There was a story in Southern California recently where a bunch of cows escaped from a slaughterhouse and they rampaged. I was like, rampaged. They walked. It's like a sensationalizing it. They rampaged through people's neighborhoods. No, they just walked through people's neighborhoods. And everybody's rooting for the cows. Cows escaped the slaughter plant. They're running around neighborhoods in residential San Diego. And people were rooting for the cows. And then they probably went and ate burgers for dinner. So that, to me, is evidence that people want meat, not necessarily slaughter. And they'd be quite pleased to get that meat experience, even if animals weren't slaughtered for it. So while, yes, people want meat, and nearly all meat today comes from once living animals' bodies, I do think in the future that we can satiate that desire for meat without having to raise and slaughter animals. So I wish that people would be content eating rice and bean burritos and lentil soup and hummus. I love all those foods. I think they're great. But it does seem like people really want that meat experience. And, those of us in the vegan bubble, I think, have to recognize that despite all of the awareness, despite everything that's happened so far, meat consumption is still going up, not down.
Hey, well, Paul Shapiro, this has been so fun. I always learn a lot when I talk to you. I appreciate you spending time with me, man.
Mike, thanks so much for having me on. It was a real pleasure to chat with you. I'm a fan of The Spoon, and so it was a real honor for me to be on the podcast. Thanks again.